All right, asynchronous apex. So one of the things that we can do is we can execute code asynchronously on a separate thread. So the way that this works is, imagine we have our transaction coming through, and we're going to execute everything synchronously. We have the capability to execute some code in a separate transaction sometime in the future. Asynchronous apex always executes after the current transaction has completed. Okay? So what you do is you mark a method with the future annotation, and this is now an asynchronous method that will execute sometime in the future. Methods marked with @future must be static, and their return type is void. The reason their return type is void is when you call an asynchronous method, what's going to happen is that you're going to continue processing synchronously in that original transaction. You're not waiting for the result to come back. You're queuing up a job to be executed sometime in the future. Now, the reason that we're talking about asynchronous apex here in the web services module is that you cannot do a synchronous web service callout from a trigger. So all web service callouts from a trigger must be done asynchronously. And if you think about it, during the execution of a trigger, we're holding on to a database connection, and we don't want to hold on to that for 2 minutes waiting for a response to come back. Okay? You can do up to 10 asynchronous requests per transaction. Now, there's a limitation where you can do no more than 200 future calls per Salesforce license per 24 hours. So Salesforce wants customers to use this, but they don't want them to go too crazy with it, because these are creating, every time you do one of these, you're essentially creating a separate transaction. I mentioned this previously. When you execute your asynchronous code in that future transaction, it gets its own set, it's its own transaction, so it gets its own set of resources that it can utilize during its own execution. Methods with the future annotation cannot take S-objects, or for that matter, any type of object as arguments. And what you're limited to are primitives or lists of primitives. Okay? Now, if you're writing asynchronous apex and you use this future annotation, what you're going to end up doing is probably passing record IDs, and then within your asynchronous apex, doing a database call to reconstitute those records based on their IDs. Okay? But at the end of the day, you can only pass primitives or lists of primitives over to your asynchronous apex. All right. Here's an example here. We have callout equals true. So there's the future annotation, and then there's this attribute, callout equals true. And callout equals true means that this can do a web service callout. There is a callout equals false, or if you leave it off, it will not be able to do a web service callout. So it's just something you need to do when you're writing a future method and you want to do a web service callout like we're doing in line 6 down here. Okay? All right, so some module review questions. Is it necessary to import a WSDL to perform a callout? Definitely not. So when we're doing our RESTful web service callouts, there is no WSDL, right? Which classes are used to send an HTTP callout and receive a response? So there's 3 of them, and if you look at the words in the sentence, they're almost all there. HTTP? Not receive. HTTP. Exactly. So HTTP request and HTTP response. Very good. If we want to make a call out from a trigger, how do we do that? What must we do? on what? Set call out equals true on what? Yeah, exactly. So we must execute it asynchronously, and our future method must be marked with call out equals true. How do you create your own transactional web service method? All right, so this one, just so you know, is referring back to a feature that we talked about associated with DML earlier. So if I'm going to create a custom web service, what other thing could I use in conjunction with that?
Keyword.
Well, the web service keyword, and if it does have an uncaught exception, then the entire transaction will be rolled back. But what if I wanted, what key class and method could I use to create my own transactional logic? I mentioned previously that
Save points.
very good. So save points, we could set up a save point, and then we could use the database.rollback method to create our own transactional logic. What is the HP callout timeout limit?
For all of the callouts, it's limited to 120 seconds.
Very good, yeah. So for all the callouts, and how many are all of those callouts?
To
10, exactly. So 10 total requests over 120 seconds. When do asynchronous methods execute?
Sometime in the future.
Yeah, this is the one question where I would have accepted the answer, I don't know. Because you kind of don't know. You know that it's going to be sometime in the future, but it's not necessarily going to be immediately. Like I said, 99.9% of the time it is, but it's not necessarily guaranteed to be that sort of near real time. Okay.